Well, you got a lot to.
My name is Josh McKinney, and I'm interviewing Brother Robert Bruyns. He's a brother in the Lord, and he's also a Vietnam vet. And I'm doing this oral interview for HIWD 375D01, History of the Korean and Vietnam Wars. And my instructor is Professor Robert Ritchie. So, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine.
Okay. All right, my first question is, when you were called upon to serve your country, what was your reaction?
Well, I wasn't ready to go, but at the same time, I was willing to serve my country. I didn't want to do what many did at that time, go to Canada and try to evade and, to keep from serving.
Okay.
But I wanted to serve in a capacity without having to kill my fellow human beings.
Mm-hmm. So you were a conscientious objector, right?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I served. My first classification was what's called a 1AO. A 1A classification meant that you were combat ready, and and that was the most prevalent indication. Most prevalent classification they had at that time was a 1A, but I was a 1AO, which meant that I was that I objected to carrying a weapon and killing my fellow human beings, but that I was willing to serve where my country needed me.
Okay. How did being a conscientious objector affect your status among the members of your unit?
They all accepted me. In fact, some of them encouraged me and told me, that what I was doing, was okay, and they all backed me up and told me that they would take care of me if we got in a firefight. They would help, and I never really caught a lot of flack over it.
Oh, that's good.
They accepted my decision on it.
Oh, that's good. Okay, the next question is kind of like a three-part question here. Where were you trained? What was your highest rank? Which division were you in? And who was your commanding officer? So you can go through each of them if you want me to repeat them. I can.
No, that's fine. When I first I took my training, because all conscientious objectors, which meant basically that you weren't willing to kill people,
Mm-hmm.
all conscientious objectors, most of them were trained as medics. Now there were some medics that weren't conscientious objectors. All medics weren't conscientious objectors, but all conscientious objectors more or less became medics.
Okay.
That's where they served at mostly. And I served and took my training and my AT and my, what was it called? It was called AIT. AIT means Advanced Individual Training. So I took my basic training at Fort Sam, Houston, Texas, and that was in 1966. And then also following my basic training at Fort Sam, Houston, Texas, I also took advanced individual training as a medic and took my medical classes also at Fort Sam, Houston, Texas.
Okay.
And my rank at that time was just I was a private E1. You start out as a private E1, then you go to after so many weeks, and after you get out of basic training, you're a private E2, and then at a later stage, you become, after so many months, you become a private first class.
Mm-hmm.
And that's called a PFC. And after my basic training, right before I went to Vietnam, they ranked me as a PFC, private first class.
Okay.
and I remained a private first class until I reached Vietnam. And when I reached Vietnam and got my orders, then they promoted me to a specialist fourth class, and I was a specialist in my field as a medic.
Okay. And that was an E4 specialist, right?
Yeah, an E4,
Okay.
which is called an SP/4. It's the same thing as if you serve in combat and you're not a constant objector, you'd be called a corporal.
Okay. And who was your commanding officer?
Immediate commanding officer at that time, he was a first lieutenant, and he was Lieutenant Long.
Okay. Could you elaborate on your experiences in boot camp?
In boot camp, basically, we did a lot of physical things that we got graded on. Physical activities, pull-ups, sit-ups, a lot of basic. That's why they called it basic training. But I also took classes in medicine, certain things, how to put on splints. It even got technical to where I was authorized to put in a trach and do a tracheotomy.
Oh, wow.
And if I needed to, they showed us how to put on splints, how to do small surgeries even, and also to how to anything pertaining to first aid.
Okay.
In other words, how to treat a sucking chest wound, and how to splint, basically anything in the field, to save a life, life-saving techniques. We were trained and took classes in how to give shots, and how to apply first aid. They would be called life-saving techniques. It's just the duties of a aid. In other words, I was a corpsman, which they listed me as a corpsman, a medical corpsman, to save lives in combat conditions.
Wow. Okay. Which battles in Vietnam were you in, and which would be, as you would describe it, as the most intense?
I was part of 3 major battle operations. One of them was Tucson. I was in Junction City, Operation Junction City. They were called military operations, and I was in on Junction City, and then I was in on Operation Manhattan toward the middle of 1967. And the most intense, where we routed out more Viet Cong, and where we captured more Viet Cong, and we did more what we'd call search and destroy missions. We would locate the enemy and destroy them with our guns. I was in the 1st Infantry Division. But I was attached to a combat, which would be not an armored combat unit, but it was a combat, what would it be called? They were 105 howitzers. They were, it was artillery. It was an artillery unit. That's what I was getting at. I was attached to an artillery unit.
Yeah.
But we also had combat ground troops that were available. That we served with at the times. At times, our other ground troops would help us out. But I was the only medic attached to the 1st Infantry Division and 1st and 5th Artillery.
Wow. So
That
1st
was,
Battalion, 5th Artillery, right?
1st Battalion, 5th Artillery.
Yeah.
And we were called Alexander Hamilton's Cannoneers.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Alexander Hamilton's Cannoneers.
Okay.
I served exactly 2 6 months, 6 month segments. At that time, if you were in combat for 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
that you would that would be uh, one that would be one you were I was in other words, I was there for a whole year, but you were it considered a tour of 6 months, 2 6 months tours. A tour was considered like 6 months. If you were over there 6 months, you could call yourself a veteran, of one tour. And but I served 2 6 months tours, which is equivalent to 1 year. 1 year is all that they could assign you at without sending you home for a little while, or without some kind of I'll say break in between that time. In other
Okay.
words, you couldn't spend 2 years without a break in between that time.
Like
So we
R&R,
yeah,
basically, right?
like an R&R, or you could go home and then you can re-enlist for another tour for another year if you could. But I served 1 year.
Okay. What did you understand to be your mission in Vietnam?
To save as many U.S. lives, or as many U.S. soldiers' lives as I possibly could for my unit.
Okay. What would you have done differently in terms of the mission and its parameters?
Well, I don't know that I would do a whole lot of things different. It was a shock to my system, more or less, because one day I was in a comfort zone, and at home going to college,
Mm-hmm.
and the next minute, I was inducted into Uncle Sam's Army, and then it wasn't but a week or two later that I was in the middle of Vietnam. And so I didn't have much time to think about it. The only thing I remember is when I arrived over there, they used they used private planes to transfer military personnel over to Vietnam. In other words,
buses, right?
yeah, they had like regular airlines,
Mm-hmm.
civilian airliners, airlifts, to take the troops over to Vietnam. They didn't have enough military planes, to take us. So there was like American Airlines, Braniff International, and they would deliver the troops. My first instinct when I arrived was I saw nothing but body bags laying on the tarmac, and it kind of astonished me. And that's when I started praying. I said, Lord, without your help, that a body bag would be waiting for me. And that was the first thing I looked when I got off the plane, of all the bodies that were
Wow.
stacked up there, ready to be taken back to the United States for burial.
Wow. How was everyday life in an army camp in Vietnam?
Well, I started out in an army camp. We actually had like a wooden hutch that we slept in, and but it didn't last long. Within about a week or so, I was reassigned. I was hoping that I'd be assigned to some kind of a medical aid station, and where I'd be taking care of people right there, in the rear, and run an aid station. But the guy that I replaced had been killed and so I replaced him in a field. I was in a capacity as a medic to a field unit, and it was an artillery unit, and so I became a field artillery medic.
Okay.
And so I basically wasn't able to stay in the confines of a little building or something like that.
Okay.
I slept after that. After the first week that I arrived in Vietnam, they sent me immediately out to the field to replace this other man, and I became a medic for the Bravo battery, Bravo battery, and I became their medic. So anywhere Bravo battery went,
You went.
I went.
So how was everyday life with the Bravo battery?
Well, with Bravo battery, everyday life was you living off of sea rations, and which is eating out of a can and living in foxholes. And so we dug foxholes. The first thing we did, morning, noon, and night, was to dig. If we got into a new area, anytime we moved, and we moved quite a lot, we had to dig new foxholes out, and we did dig them pretty deep.
How deep were they?
They were probably a good 6-8 foot deep,
Wow.
something like that. And the bad thing is about it, they would fill up with water during the monsoon season, so we'd float to the top, and be laying in there in a ground filled water hole, and so it would fill up. So we had no home, we had no building to get out of the rain. It was just it was a foxhole where you sat, and unless you were being attacked, or if things would break out, or if the enemy attacked us, we reacted, and we'd fire our guns, and at nighttime, well, actually 24/7, that our guns would blast at old targets and new targets. They were called H&Is, which means harassment and indictment, which means that we constantly fired our 105 howitzers at old targets or anywhere we were instructed to fire at the enemy.
Okay. Did you ever feel discouraged? And if you did, what moments lifted your spirits?
I felt discouraged about 100% of the time. I felt like that I was pretty well forgotten, but the good times were where I would get some mail. Sometimes mail would be backed up, but I would get the cards from people back home, and that would lift my spirits. Mother and Daddy, and at the time I was engaged to be married to Sister Merlene Bruyns at that time. Well, she wasn't a Bruyns then, but anyway, I was engaged. She was my girlfriend, and we were engaged to be married when I came home, if I came home, and but that lifted my spirits. She wrote me constantly, although I wasn't able to write much, because it was always in the mud or dirty, and and I didn't have much time to write. My duties included taking care of my men and taking care of shots, and if they were hurt or whatever their needs were, I tried to meet their needs.
Could you share a couple of moments when you knew that the Lord had protected you?
I think the Lord had His hand on me from day one. I felt His presence a lot, and of course afterwards, after things happened, you always get shook up, and and you realize what the Lord had just done. But basically, the Lord protected me just day after day after day after day, and there were times when I felt like that the Lord was just right there close by, and I didn't realize it so much because of the activity surrounding my job and all. But many times, God would protect me. In a lot of instances, He allowed me to be spared. I remember when we were attacked at different times, and shells would go off, mortar rounds would go off, and above my sandbags. I had sandbags surrounding my foxhole, and there would be sharp, what we'd call shrapnel sticking in my sandbags right above, above my hole, and found, shrapnel and different things and fragments, mortar fragments and stuff, just all close to me, and not one time was I hurt. And it had to be God that protected me, from time after time.
Wow. This is the final question. How did your participation in the war impact your life afterward?
Well, that's easy to say. After I came home, I thought I was okay, but different thing. I started having closely after I got out and came back home. I had to try to readjust. It was hard. I kept thinking, of the things that I should have done and things I didn't do, things that maybe would have made a difference. And I wasn't able to retrace my steps, and I wasn't able to redo those things. And it turned out until to this day, I'm still having to meet with a psychologist at the Veterans Administration and everything at times to talk about it, because it helps to talk, they say, and let my feelings out. But there's not very many days, there's not hardly a day goes by to where my mind don't go back to Vietnam, and I'm right back in some of those same situations. And it's just been really hard for 40 years, 40 some odd years, 47, 48 years, and everything, for me to forget it. It just seems like it just overwhelms me at times, and all I can do is, sit and cry. And it just, and I know that don't do anything, but it helps my emotions. My emotions are still shattered, and, and they tell me that it'll always be. I suffer from PTSD, which is more or less a chronic situation. It's post-traumatic stress, and like I said, there's not a very few, every few minutes or every few hours during the day, if something triggers it, everything, my mind goes right back to Vietnam. And some of the things, the certain smells, colors, and anything will trigger certain things. You go to the store, and you see certain things, colors, the color green, a certain kind of green, just reminds me of what we wore, my fatigues, and and our apparel, even our T-shirts, and all our everything we wore was called OD green. And so when I see that color, it just, man, when I hear certain sounds, like helicopters, sudden backfires, loud noises, I go to pieces, and still do up until this time. People coming up behind me, if I don't know that you're behind me, I'll try to hurt you, but I don't know. It's just sudden. It's a sudden. I felt for the last 40 years that I'm not safe, and that's all due to, the things, traumatic things that happened
in Vietnam.
Yeah, and loud noises, somebody coming up behind me and just touching me or something. You have to do it easy, where I'll know what's going on. Otherwise, I'll throw whatever I've got in my hand, or I'll drop something if I've got something in my hand. And I'm very easily scared, and also very easily agitated. Certain times, it's just kind of, and I'll feel that depression come up on me, and it's just like a weight, and it's just I don't mean to get like that, but it's just like a black cloud hovering over me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mainly just I feel like I'm alone, you know, or I feel like that I didn't do enough. Or I feel like that, you know, maybe I could have changed the outcome of certain conditions, you know. I've seen so much and everything that I wish wish there was others that should have come home, and here I was allowed to come home, and you know, and I grieve for them.
Yeah.
And I grieve for my fellow soldiers and my fellow human beings that I served with, and I never actually got a chance. One of my I wish I'd got to do one of the things that I wasn't able to do. I wasn't able to tell them bye, because I went and cleared out of my unit and got on the plane and everything, and I wasn't able to meet with them to individually tell them how much I enjoyed being with them, and how much I appreciated them helping me in every way possible. They made my life easier. We were as close could be, because I never grew up with any other. My siblings were all so much older than I was, and every man there that I served with was my brother, and we were so close and so close. And I grieve for them that I wasn't able to do more for them, and I wasn't able to be there for them in the same capacity that they were there for me, and that's what I grieve over. And to this day, I can't hardly shake it. It's just like at times when I'm just really down, and then other times I'll try to lift myself up, and church helps a lot, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Holding on to God helps a lot, and but it's just it's been difficult at times.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you spending your time for this interview.
Thank you.
And thank you for your sacrifice.
Well,
And the sacrifice wasn't just back then. It's continual every day for you.
yes,
What you've been through in Vietnam.
yes.
And I appreciate your sacrifice.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you doing this interview. And maybe somebody will be helped by it, and let somebody know. I've got my articles and magazines, and I'm not by myself in all of this. There's many others that served, and you know, served in different capacities. But I think all of us will always remember, you know, those that served there will always remember our experiences in Vietnam. Some greater, some worse, but I think it was the hand of God that brought me home, and I'll always be grateful for that.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you once again.
All right, thank you.